Hey, welcome to Leaders Underway. This is a channel where we talk about the application and practice of leadership. My name is Eric Moore. I'm a nuclear engineer and I'm a former nuclear submarine officer. And for the careful listener who's asking once again, why is this nuclear engineer talking to me about leadership? One of the reasons is I believe that STEM professionals and those studying STEM would do well to pay more attention to leadership competencies, interpersonal dynamics. I think so often people in STEM focus only on the technical competencies and they're really leaving opportunities behind by not focusing on leadership competencies. So that's one of the reasons that I'm doing this content. So during the last episode, I talked about a thrown object, an object thrown in a fit of pique, if you will. And during this one, I'm going to discuss a lost object. It's a little bit different, but similar at the same time. Let's face it, it's 2024. Attention spans are quite narrow. I'm going to present my 3 takeaways first, and then, tell the story and then go through the takeaways in more detail. So my first takeaway for this story that I'm about to tell is that don't freak out, don't obsess, but always think about the worst case scenarios in any given situation. My second takeaway is going to be once you've considered the worst case scenarios, communicate those to your subordinates, your peers, and your management within your organization. Try to obtain some consensus with them, at least share your perspective. And my third takeaway for the story is going to be once you've communicated these, potentialities, worst case scenarios, you then should endeavor to design processes to mitigate them and also document what you're doing along the way, which is also referred to as CYA in certain circles. So, on to the story. So, as I said, a lost object. This story concerns my duties and responsibilities as the quality assurance officer on my submarine. That was a pretty big deal job for me. The quality assurance officer was a role that I wasn't a very good junior officer the first 2 years on the boat. At least I suffered a poor reputation. A lot of that was my fault, but in the QAO role, I started to shine a little bit more. I was getting recognition for a job well done. The role suited my strengths, I suppose, and I was doing well. And I worked really hard at it as well. So I got through my first, and the QAO role really has to do with maintenance, in particular critical maintenance. Maintenance that if you do it wrong, it could lead to literally the catastrophic loss of the ship. So we're talking about maintenance that deals with seawater systems. It's anything that deals with the whole envelope, because on a submarine, which you go hundreds of feet underwater, of course, every 100 feet of water is roughly 44 psi. For reference, you physics people, engineering people, you probably know this. Atmospheric pressure at sea level is 14.7 pounds per square inch, psi. So every 100 feet underwater a submarine goes, it's going to touch 44 pounds more of pressure. And so the purpose of the submarine's hull is to keep that pressure outside of the submarine and keep the people just a normal, everyday 14.7 pounds or so, and keep the high pressure outside the submarine. That's ideally, right? So if you have failure of the hull, which that doesn't happen very often, right? On a serious submarine, or you can have leakage through like your gasket material, your O-rings. You can have little problems along the way, but overall you're looking for, let's keep the pressure out. So, and this maintenance we would do for various reasons. We had to make sure we did it right. So we generated paperwork to prove we did it correctly to a T. And in this business, we call these controlled work packages. So I was involved in approving the controlled work packages. When the sailors did the work, there were special qualifications. So there was craftsman qualification. That was the person who did the work. They would, at the end of the job, install some gaskets, O-rings. They would use a torque wrench to torque fasteners to a particular torque value. And then you had these quality assurance inspectors who would vouch that the craftsman did everything right. The quality assurance inspector, or QAI, had to watch everything. And on the paperwork at the end, or during the process, they would vouch, yes, the craftsman said that they torqued to this value. I was watching, I saw the torque wrench, the dial. I can vouch that they did go to that torque value. I can vouch this was the O-ring they used. And all this stuff was important, right? So the Navy catastrophically lost a submarine called the USS Thresher in 1963, and everyone aboard died. This was not a wartime loss. This was not, we got hit by a torpedo in World War II. This was literally the design of the submarine and maybe the maintenance practices. I think at this point it was more design was not adequate to keep the submarine safe in all the scenarios. And after that, the Navy decided we can't let this happen again. There was a recommendation to create a new safety program. That program became the SubSafe program. As the quality assurance officer on my submarine, I did training on that program every year. I had my own technical training I gave to mechanics who are more involved with this type of work. So that was machinery division. Those were nukes, auxiliary division, other mechanics. And then we had torpedo men also did this work as well on their torpedo tubes. So had to do the work right, had to maintain the records correctly, and you had to save the records, the controlled work package, for the life of the ship. If you ran out of room on the boat, you ship it to somewhere in DC, and someone in Big Navy NAVSEA would keep it for the remainder of the life of the ship. If it's a functioning commissioned submarine, it has this paperwork on these vital systems. And so, it was an important job to do things right. I leaned on my sailors to do the work correctly. They had more mechanical knowledge than I did. I was really good with the paper. I learned from them, different things about how they actually did their work. But at the end of the day, we had to use the right parts. We had to torque things to the right torque value to keep the ship safe, right? So I got through my first refit fine. I was cautioned by my CO about my record keeping, and not in the sense that we weren't filling out the forms correctly. We did that fine. But he noted in my stateroom where I slept, that was like kind of my quarters. I slept with two other officers, not with them, but we had 3 different racks in there, and a rack is a bed. And the captain noted that there were controlled work packages, CWPs, on my bed, on my rack. During the day, I wasn't like sleeping with them, and he said, Lieutenant Moore, this is not a good way to do business. If we lose one of these, it's a big deal. We have to have a squadron critique. If we find out, hopefully we don't find out at sea, because then we'd probably have to come back into port and the mission would be over. It would be a huge deal. It's a nightmare. And I'm just thinking to myself, of all the things you're worried about one of these packets of paper growing legs and just getting, crawling off the boat. It's not going to happen. Like even if I misplace something temporarily, we're going to find it in like 2 seconds, or we're going to find it. It's not a big deal. So I had some hubris that this couldn't happen to me. Think about my first takeaway that I already presented to you. Consider the worst case scenario. I didn't even consider it when people brought it to my attention. I thought, this is stupid. This isn't going to happen. But I couldn't tell the captain that his idea was stupid and his concern was stupid. I didn't dare do that. I've been around way too long, and I just understood. I just had to keep my mouth shut, say yes, sir, and I had to do something. I had to take some action so he would see that I took action on his recommendation, and I did that. I stopped keeping these records on my rack, and but at the same time, I was not convinced that what he said mattered at all. So that was my hubris. So fast forward to refit 2. I got through refit 1 really well. Sort of developed a reputation as a good QAO. And then one day, refit 2, the torpedo men are working on their torpedo tubes, and they approach me and say, Lieutenant Moore, we have a small problem, just a little problem. We lost one of the CWPs, one of the records for this work. this vital work that we have to have the paperwork for. And I'm just thinking to myself, no, you guys don't get it. You have to find that. Like that's not a little deal. That's kind of a big deal, but you're going to find it. So go find it, and let's work this out. You got to find. You're going to find this. We can't just recreate this. That's not how this works. And a few days go by. I'm like, you guys find it yet? No, they have not found it yet. I went to the torpedo room with them. I was, pretty busy during this refit, and my anxiety was already at a pretty high level. And everything had been going okay to this point, but now my anxiety is climbing as these guys are telling me, well, we don't know where it is. We don't know what we did with it. I'm like, did you bring it home with you or something? No. Okay. So I go look in the torpedo room with them. I'm not seeing it. Friday rolls around. I distinctly remember being at my house that I rented with some other folks on the front porch, just hanging out, just thinking like, I am so screwed. Next week, I'm going to have to tell the captain we lost this vital paperwork. We're going to have to redo the maintenance, but we're going to have to also tell on ourselves to the squadron QAO that we lost it. I don't think it's going to affect our underway, but even if it doesn't push back our departure date for our mission, still this looks terrible. This is not something I want to tell the captain. And by the way, I'm also thinking the torpedo men screwed me, right? That's my mind. This isn't my fault. They screwed me. That's what I was thinking. And I later, realized with perspective, that's not the case. I screwed myself, but that was what I felt at that time. So Monday rolls around, Tuesday, I don't remember what day, but they approach me and they say, guess what? We found it. Lieutenant Moore, we've got the CWP. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, thank you so much. And, I had not blown up on them over this issue. I was, kind of stern, but I didn't lose my cool the whole time. And, I think there was a temptation to lose my cool when they told me they found it, even though I was happy they found it. It was kind of like, guys, what the heck? Well, so I was happy they found it. And I just told them, look, we got lucky this time. We got really lucky. I didn't really have instruction for you guys. I didn't have a process before this happened. We have a process now. First off, I have a cabinet that's my inbox in my stateroom. It's going to be labeled. It's an inbox. If you want to give me a controlled work package, you put it there. You either hand it to me in person or you put it in this designated spot that I know is safe. It's not my bed. It's not somewhere, it's right here. If I give you a controlled work package, because you have to kind of toss them back and forth between individuals for different signatures and reviews. If I'm to give you one, I'm either going to hand it to you in person or you are going to have an inbox in your space. You're going to have in the torpedo room a spot where I can put stuff, and it will be the only spot we put things when I can't find one of you in person. And by the way, we're also keeping a central log of who has what open package, and it's going to be updated every time it changes hands. And I went to the other divisions as well, MDiv and Auxiliary Division, and I told them, guys, same thing. You need an inbox in your space where, if I can't find one of you in person, I will put it in that box. And we did that process for the rest of my time as the QAO, another year or two, and it went fine, went great. And so, as I said, I suffered from some hubris here. This was really, there's the officer's always at fault, right? So when something goes wrong, there's in the military, it's always the officer's fault. That's especially the junior officer's job is to take blame, it seems like, right? Part of the job description. The sooner you figure that out as a JO, the better off you'll be. Just resign yourself to that fact and take it, right? So, in my case, I had such hubris that I didn't think this was ever going to happen. I thought it was silly to even consider. I had enough on my mind. And it was my fault when it did happen. It wasn't the torpedo men's fault. From then on out, I trained these sailors, 30 or 40 sailors who did this QA work. Hey, this is how we do business. I talked about it at the training. I emphasized, and I did not talk about it before, but I covered it and I said, this is a huge deal. These are the consequences if we screw it up, and you're going to have to redo the work, and we're going to do a critique. So here's our process. And we followed it, and everything was cool. So again, takeaway one, zoom out to generalize it. So I'm not going to be talking as much Navy here. I'm going to be talking more general concepts. So number one takeaway, whatever your vocation is, whatever you're dealing with, always consider all of your worst case scenarios, both in terms of consequence and frequency, but just consider them and think through them, right? So if you're if you're planning a vacation, what's my worst case scenario? If I'm applying for a new job, what's my worst case scenario during the interview? What do I need to study? If you can take this anywhere, right? So, and then number two, once you've considered your worst case scenario, then consider how you will communicate this to your peers, your subordinates, your management, and then basically obtain some level of consensus with them. They may have a different take than you do, and that's great when that happens. They may have a different take, and then you present your arguments a little bit more carefully or differently, and you may sway them to your side on your interpretation. But have that conversation. I'm not saying push it down their throat. However, I think it's always helpful to have that discussion, because especially if you're new in your career, or it's a new friend or something, because this can affect not just work stuff but friends, family. Just having the discussion and feeling it out beforehand is always a good way to go. Okay, and then once you've done takeaway two, once you've had that communication, takeaway three would be set up your work processes to avoid the negative outcomes, to mitigate them or prevent them, and to achieve your desired outcomes. So if you're in sales, that would be make the sale and retain a customer for a long time. If you're if you're in STEM, it might be write code, right? Write excellent code, and that's maintainable and that can be integrated into an overall product. So it depends on what your vocation is, but you're going to design a process that gets you where you want to go on a consistent basis. And then, there's the CYA aspect. I think that I really would like to cover this briefly. I think CYA is important. I think it gets a bad rap. And here's why I believe that. A lot of CYA is thinking through different scenarios, and I think that can only be beneficial to consider different scenarios, different possibilities. I think where CYA goes wrong is when you have people who start doing less work and devote more of their time and attention to just simply more and more CYA. That is I've seen that happen, and that is a negative way to go. However, if you think about it this way, so you implement takeaway one, you have thought about your worst case scenarios, you implement takeaway two, you've communicated your perception of those to your peers, your subordinates, and your management. You've designed your processes to mitigate or prevent them, and to actually reach your desired work goals and your work products effectively. And you still go wrong. Well, if you have documentation along the way, you can demonstrate how you considered the potential negative outcomes before you even started work. So, that could be emails, that could be, in my case, I had paper logs of things changing hands. If you can tell the story of how you tried to mitigate the issue and you fell short, that's a lot different than, I don't know what happened, but it won't happen again. If that's not much of a story, that's a pretty weak story. So when something goes wrong, if you think through everything and document it, that is a form of CYA. And, it's not unreasonable to implement that as part of your work process. And for younger people, once you've been through some of these cycles enough times, hopefully it'll stick with you, and you can see for yourself why it's important. So, my message is do CYA, but do it in a way that enables the work and is defensible, I suppose. So that's it for this video. If you've stuck around this long, hopefully you've gotten something out of this. If so, please leave a like. Also, if you have a similar story, or if you have different story, or you have different different takeaways, different analyses of the story that I gave, let me know in the comments below. I would love to see some discussions around those points. In addition, try to think about ways that this applies to what's going on in your life, whether you're dealing with something at work, dealing with a personal issue. Take some time to think about how this story and these takeaways could impact something that's going on in your life. Because although these stories are from a faraway nuclear submarine, they're really meant for you, the viewer, so you can be a leader underway in your life. Thanks. See you next time.